Welcome, everyone. Today, very special guest, H.G. Tudor, self-aware narcissist psychopath. He needs no introduction, but how are you today, H.G.?
I'm very well, thank you, Jared. Thank you for inviting me on.
My pleasure. We're all very eager to hear your insights here. The first thing I'd like to ask you, the first rule of narcissism. What is the first rule of narcissism?
The first rule of narcissism is that all appliances must be kept under control and must be brought under control. So this is, if you will, it's a little bit like one of RoboCop's prime directives. So that within the narcissist, there is this operating system that essentially dictates that when the narcissist is dealing with people, either there is an interaction or a contemplated interaction, the narcissist is geared to bring that individual under control, and there are a variety of options, a variety of manipulations that are available for the narcissist to achieve that. And if there's a threat to control, to nullify that threat to control, and then to maintain control over this individual, where you're dealing with an aware narcissist, which, as you know, aware narcissists are very rare. The aware narcissist knows that that's what they're seeking to do. The vast majority of narcissists are unaware. They do not know that they're seeking control. So if you like, this first law is programmed into their subconscious on their behalf.
And it makes everything they do make sense. Like once you realize it's all about control and the position of how they feel in regard to you, that helps it all make sense.
In a way, the approach of the narcissist is quite a simple one to grasp, which is everything, and triple underline everything, the narcissist does when it comes to other people is governed by the pursuit of the prime aims, chief of which, control, fuel, character traits, and then residual benefits. Those are the four aspects of it. And so, almost to be glib, if someone wants to say, why did the narcissist do this? The answer is because of the prime aims. Why did the narcissist do that? Because of the prime aims. And then you can expand on what that means in terms of, why did the narcissist shout at me? Well, you'll have threatened the narcissist's control in some way. Sometimes you're able to identify how that person did it. Sometimes it's less clear, but we can still say, you evidently threatened their need for control. Their narcissism obeyed the first law of narcissism, which was to bring you back under control. Your action ignited the heated fury of the narcissist, and so they shouted at you, and then you backed down, thus giving the narcissist the control that's sought. So there you are. Why did the narcissist shout at me? Because it was about the necessity of control. Why did the narcissist send me lots of text messages? To try and bring you under control by flattering you. So it always goes back to what that is. And it's interesting how often people fail to understand that message. It's understandable with people when they are caught up in the dynamic with the narcissist, Jared, because then their emotional thinking is clouding their process, that they're not relying on logic to the greatest degree. But for people perhaps observing externally, particularly in relation to famous people, and they're asking, why are they behaving this way? And it's been explained to them, well, this person's a narcissist. Therefore, time and time again, they still keep asking, yeah, but why did they do this? Why did they do that? Sometimes it just doesn't sink in.
Now, I mean, I think a lot of people, they just have a hard time grasping that people may do these things out of malice and do these things to hurt others, and they just don't care. They really don't care. But what do you say to the people who struggle with that concept?
Most people expect other human beings to be similar to themselves. And part of that is an evolutionary thing whereby it enables people to get along. So most people will operate with trust. So they expect other people to behave in a trusting way. Most people will tell the truth. Everybody lies to some degree, but most people operate on a truthful basis. So they expect the same of other people. Most people will exhibit some care of consideration for other human beings to varying degrees. And it's a real shock to the system to find out that that person lies, manipulates, doesn't have any emotional empathy for you because it runs contrary to how you behave and how you expect other people to behave around you. So it's a real jolt to the system. Because when you look at that narcissist, they've got 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth. They breathe the air. They go to the bathroom. They eat food. To all intents and purposes, they seem like you. And then you realize they're very different when it comes to the way that they function.
All right. And it's like Dr. George Simon said, it's not that they don't see, they disagree. And it's not that they aren't aware, they just don't care. And I think that's been helpful for me to understand too.
Okay, fair enough.
And another thing I think that is helpful that you do is the common belief now, I think, amongst new professionals like Dr. Salerno is there's a spectrum of narcissism. And you have lesser, mid-range, greater, and then you being the ultra narcissist.
Yes.
But could you explain what those differences are for us?
Certainly. So if we talk about narcissistic traits to start off with, there's a very wide spectrum because everybody will have some degree of narcissistic traits. So those are the traits of anger and envy and jealousy and infidelity and resentment and defiance and so forth. So everybody has those. That doesn't make you a narcissist. So someone who's empathic will have narcissistic traits. Someone who's normal will have narcissistic traits. Someone who is narcissistic but not a narcissist will have stronger narcissistic traits than the other 2 categories that I've just mentioned. So you have a scale, a spectrum with regard to the narcissistic traits. And for everybody who's not a narcissist, they will also have some degree of emotional empathy and empathic traits alongside those narcissistic traits. So if you think of the first spectrum, which is narcissistic traits, that runs from very few and very weak all the way through to lots of them and particularly strong. And then at the far end of that, you will get into the territory of the narcissist. And so if you imagine there's a dotted line on that spectrum, once you've crossed that, you are dealing now with narcissists. And that means certain considerations apply. Now, sometimes people think to themselves, when I talk about a lesser narcissist, it means they're less of a narcissist than a greater. That's not correct. They are all full-blooded, bona fide, dyed-in-the-wool narcissists. They're not more of a narcissist than another one. They're just different types. So within the type of narcissist, there is a spectrum which runs, as you've mentioned, lesser. And within that, there's lower lesser, middle lesser, upper lesser A, upper lesser B. Within mid-range, there is lower mid-range, middle range A, middle range B, upper mid-range, and then greater, lower greater, middle greater, upper greater, and then me, the ultra. Across that spectrum, there are differences with regard to awareness. There are differences with regard to the level of control over ignited fury that's exhibited. There are differences with regard to the type of fury that is exhibited, heated or cold. There are differences with regard to cognitive function, levels of charisma, effectiveness of manipulations, the range of manipulations, and so on and so forth. And all of those are differing factors which vary dependent upon which subschool you're dealing with.
And when you say narcissistic traits, what do you mean when you say that?
Well, as I mentioned, so for instance, a narcissistic trait is to be envious of your neighbor's new sports car. That doesn't make you a narcissist. It doesn't even make you a bad person. But the fact is that you look on that car and go, oh, I wish it was mine. You're exhibiting envy. And that's a narcissistic trait. Pride is a narcissistic trait. But it also has to be remembered that these narcissistic traits can operate in a healthy way when they are ensconced within empathic traits and emotional empathy. So let's take, for example, the narcissistic trait of envy. So envy is wanting something that somebody else has got. So for some people, their trait of envy may be very low. They really aren't interested in what other people have. It doesn't bother them that the neighbor has got a really good-looking wife. It doesn't bother them that their house is larger. It doesn't bother them that they've got a better job than them. It doesn't bother them that they've got a really flash car. But somebody else might go, oh, I wish I had a car like that, and just grumbles to himself about it. Nothing occurs. But you might then think, I'd really like a car like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save up, or I'm going to get a side hustle, or I'm going to get a promotion so I earn more money. And that isn't hurting anybody, because what you're doing is your envious narcissistic trait is driving you to find a way to earn more money without causing a problem for anybody else, so you can afford a car that's like your neighbor's or perhaps better than his. If, for instance, you were minded in the dead of night to pop outside and run a screwdriver down the side of your neighbor's car in order to damage it, that's when your narcissistic trait of envy has come out from behind the shroud of empathic traits so that it becomes harmful. And again, a non-narcissist could behave that way because, for instance, it might be that the neighbor has been rubbing his face in it with regard to this new car repeatedly, which drives down the other neighbor's emotional empathy, so that his narcissistic trait of envy comes to the fore. So he goes and does something like that. He's not doing it for the need of control like a narcissist. He's doing it because he has a strong trait of envy, and that envy has come out from behind. It's like rolling back the emotional empathy, so there's no guardrail there any longer.
I see.
Yeah.
I think what I have said in the past, and you can let me know if you agree or disagree with this, but I have said not everyone has narcissistic traits because, as according to the DSM, like people that have narcissism, feelings of grandiosity and superiority, hypersensitive to criticism, a sense of entitlement, envious of other people's success, a lack of empathy, exploitation, and those things have to be persistent and pervasive over many areas of life, according to the DSM. So that's why I have said not everyone has narcissistic traits, but everyone absolutely has the ability to do toxic behaviors. But what do you think about that?
I disagree with you. Everybody has narcissistic traits. The distinction is what you're identifying there is the criteria that is used to make a determination of narcissism for the purposes of saying that someone has narcissistic personality disorder. So when you're using it in that sense, you might say, well, that person doesn't have any delusions of grandeur, so that criteria is missing, or rather that criterion is missing. They don't have repeated thoughts of unparalleled success and unreasonable expectations of success. Therefore, that criterion is missing. When I talk about narcissistic traits, I don't mean the criterion that you've referenced. I basically mean traits such as pride and envy and argumentativeness and anger. And everybody has those to some degree. You have to, because if you didn't, for instance, selfishness is a narcissistic trait. If you didn't have some degree of selfishness, your home would be overrun with people that you were letting stay there, be eating all your food, using all of your utilities, all your money would be gone. You have to exhibit some selfishness in order for self-preservation. And where you are on that scale of selfishness will vary. So there's a distinction made between the criteria that you've talked about for the purpose of a determination of NPD, where some people will not exhibit those behaviors. I agree with that. But when I talk about narcissistic traits, I'm not referring to those criteria. I'm referring to the traits of selfishness and pride and anger and argumentative. It's something else.
I understand. That makes sense to me, and I can see it through when you say that.
Yeah.
And lately, you've been talking a lot about the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds case. What are your thoughts on all of that mess?
Well, it is a clusterfuck, but it provides me with plenty of material. It's certainly a pleasure to talk about different personalities than Meghan Markle. I know there's a lot of interest in her, so I continue to ascertain things that she's doing. But with the Lively Reynolds Baldoni, I've already analysed Reynolds and made a determination. Lively, she's still going through the Tudor scope as we speak. A couple more episodes are coming out later in the course of today, at the time of you and I speaking. And what you have is a very interesting interaction, because on the one hand, you might say, right, Baldoni was accused of sexual harassment, and he's held himself out as the sort of, the man that's a feminist. He's got his man bun. He talks about, it's not women that need to make the changes to deal with toxicity, it's men that has to. And you might think, well, that could show considerable emotional empathy from Justin Baldoni, or is it all a front? He creates this image, and then he engages in this sexual harassment, accused of walking into the trailer and seeing her naked, and that he was talking about pornography with Jamie Heath in front of Lively, etc. And then, so Lively then goes at him with the lawsuit claiming sexual harassment, and then he fights back, suing the New York Times and then also Reynolds and Lively, and discloses his 168-page timeline, which contains evidence which starts to show things whereby she was suggesting, oh, don't worry, I'm just pumping milk for my child, but you can come in, it's no problem. And it's, so this starts to put a different context on it all. And so whilst she plays the role initially of, I'm the victim and I had to have a sit-down meeting partway through It Ends With Us in order to say, here's my list of demands because of your behavior, it then starts to paint a picture of, actually, you're quite flirtatious anyway, and you're rather bullying with your behaviors. And so that starts to suggest a possible personality type. You then get the added complication of, when she makes these accusations against Baldoni, is she doing of her own volition? Or where does Ryan Reynolds fit into all of this? Because could it be the archetypal situation of two actors? They get close together, they have physical scenes, they have to kiss, etc. They're flesh and blood, so they will generate a degree of attraction towards one another. Is it the case that Blake Lively is not getting the attention she wants off old Deadpool because he's too busy gadding over to the UK to watch Wrexham AFC? She's feeling a little bit left out, and therefore she turns to Baldoni. Reynolds gets wind of this, and in classic behavior, he says, what's going on between you and Justin Baldoni? And she goes, help, that awful Justin Baldoni. He came after me. He's such a wolf and an animal. Ryan, go get him. And so she plays the victim. Reynolds is portrayed as the rescuer, and Baldoni is portrayed as the perpetrator. And so Reynolds goes wading in saying, don't you effing fat shame my wife. And then he starts writing scenes for It Ends With Us, and then it looks like the two of them conspiring to take it all up. So it's a lovely soap opera in itself. And I don't want to say too much at this juncture as to precisely where I see really what has gone on until I've determined what all the players are. And then when I've done that, I'll say, right, my take on all of this is what has happened. And that's one of the beautiful things, Jared, about understanding narcissism, is that it then equips you with the ability, when you know that somebody is a narcissist, to make predictions about the behavior. And when you see the behavior, you can interpret it through the prism of their narcissism. So when you see somebody do something, you can go, right, okay, because of what has gone on there, ordinarily, we might think that it's because of A, but we know this person's a narcissist. So we know there's a greater chance that they would engage in infidelity, that they've got no emotional empathy, that this looks like an assertion of control because. So it enables you, it's the key that unlocks it all. So you might look at a situation and go, well, I'm not really sure what's going on there. And when you have the narcissism, when you know that somebody is a narcissist, you know that everything that they do in relation to other people is in the pursuit of the prime aims. So that then informs you. So it's, for instance, like with Meghan Markle. You might go, why on earth has she decided that she's going to make a video in a back garden that makes it look like she's taking a leak and it's unprofessional? What's going through her mind? Very simple. There's been a threat to her control as a consequence of as ever having been leaked. She needs to nullify that threat to control. Her arrogance and sense of entitlement causes her to think that everybody will regard an impromptu video as really cool. So she makes the impromptu video in an attempt to nullify that threat to control. There you are. That's why she did it. And you can understand that because of her narcissism.
And before I circle back to Ryan Reynolds and friends, the interesting thing about Meghan Markle is, and the same thing that there was with Amber Heard, there's a group of people that are just absolutely convinced, nope, Meghan Markle is the victim. Nope, Amber Heard was the victim. And they talk so surely of themselves about it, it can have almost a gaslighting effect just listening to them. But what do you think of that phenomenon?
There are a number of factors at play with those individuals. First of all, there are some individuals who are genuinely hard of understanding, Quite simply, they're thick and they just don't get it. And they occupy a place in the world. You then have individuals who simply, and they're not narcissists, but they simply don't like to be told that they are wrong because it makes them feel uncomfortable. It makes them feel stupid. So it's easier for them to try and be consistent and say, no, I'll defy the evidence, or I'll interpret the evidence with my preconceived bias for the purposes of maintaining a consistency of approach. Doing a volte-face makes me feel uncomfortable, makes me look stupid, so I'm not going to do it. Even though their slavish devotion to the incorrect interpretation may cause them to look stupid, they're able to reconcile in their mind that what they're doing is correct, so they stick with it. You also have individuals, of course, that will have an agenda. So, for instance, there'll be those that will say, oh, hashtag me too, we should always believe the woman. And therefore, Amber Heard should be believed. And, Johnny Depp. And remember, as well, with some of these situations, there's grey territory. So it's never so clear as, Johnny Depp is the absolutely whiter than white, untouchable living saint. He's done bad things. He has been unpleasant. He's behaved in a toxic way. And therefore, what they'll do is they'll also look for the evidence that supports their theory, and they will jettison anything that doesn't, that flies against it, which, is typical sort of conspiracy theorist approach that is adopted by certain individuals. So with some of them, they're just too stupid to understand. Others is because they don't want to accept that they're wrong because it makes them feel stupid. Others, they have an agenda and it fits with their agenda, so they don't want to lose sight of it. With some, they will be narcissists. And when you tell them that they're wrong, they immediately have to reject that. So they continue to follow a route which is incorrect based on the evidence because their narcissism tells them that they are right. There's also the effect that once upon a time, the individual who might have some rather strange ideas and would be in the minority would be sat on their own in the corner of the pub with nobody really bothering them. But now these individuals can all get in touch with one another through the internet, and then birds of a feather flock together. So they form a community where it's all, we believe Amber Heard. And they feel a sense of camaraderie and belonging, which continues to drive them to adopt the stance that Heard's the victim, Depp's the aggressor. And there are other people that agree with me. So we're all right. And although we're the minority, we're the ones that can see it. You lot out there, the majority, you don't get it. You're the stupid ones. And so by finding those like-minded people, they find validation, which enables them to stick with the view. There's also been an increase, I think, generally in the way that people absorb information, that they operate in echo chambers, which I've touched on a little bit there with the birds of the feather flocking together, that many people have lost or have a reduced ability to look at things in the grey, to accept that there are two sides to every story, to evaluate the evidence. And people are much more encouraged that, it starts with the insidious, are you Team Baldoni or are you Team Lively? And you can say, well, actually, I might think that both of them are difficult individuals. No, you can't do that. You've got to be on somebody's side. You've got to take a stance. So I think there's a variety of factors that affects people with regard to this entrenched thinking.
I mean, people really struggle with more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Yes.
They also really struggle with two sides of every story, because that one in particular, it can be a pretty invalidating thing to say to someone who has just gotten out of an abusive situation. But on the other hand, we also know that narcissists love to lie and spread smear campaigns. So if you're hearing that first, you would certainly hope people would believe there's two sides to every story in that case. So, but people really struggle. More than one thing can be true. People want it to be black and white. They want, like, Amber to be the complete good guy and Johnny Depp to be the complete bad guy, or vice versa. And it's not that simple.
No, it isn't. And also, there could be an element of, it used to be the case before social media and intrusive media and the rolling news that you have, that people who were famous, you only really got to know stuff about them to the extent they wanted it known. they were very good at keeping that because it was very difficult to get access. You didn't have gossip sites. You didn't have people walking around with a video camera in their pocket, which might just record a famous person getting into a fight outside of a bar. It was eye testimony and be like, yeah, I don't believe you. You're just saying that to try and get a bit of, to get, no, seriously, it happened. Whereas now, with the ability to gain greater access in that way, but also there are so many platforms, there are so many television channels, there are so many streamers. There are, YouTube has come along and has really challenged the orthodoxy of conventional terrestrial television. So you're fighting all of the time to get noticed. And that means that for many famous people, they've got to give up more of themselves in order to keep themselves in the public eye, which means losing some of the mystery associated with them. And therefore, once upon a time, you would look to an individual and think, oh, yeah, he's my favorite pop star. And the fact that he's a raging alcoholic and beats up his wife never got out because he was so carefully managed. And there was no social media to get the bongo drums going about it. So you just always thought they were a really good person. Now you could form a view about somebody, and then there is this, oh my goodness me, these reports are coming out, and I now realize that they're an awful human being. But I don't really want to think that of this person that I've bought the records of and I've gone to see the movies of and so on and so forth. I don't want to admit that I've been let down. So again, there's that factor of thinking, no, I refuse to accept that they're like that. It's just gossip. And of course, one of the easiest things to do these days, because there is so much of it, is to actually, when you're faced with actual evidence, is just to play the old fake news. That's not true. That's created by AI. That's just been made up by a gossip site. So then it enables people to get that warm, prurient feeling of, my hero's intact, because all of this mudslinging I can just dismiss as AI-generated slop, and it's just people trying to get clicks, rather than thinking, actually, is that evidence viable? Is it credible? It does look like, actually, that this person isn't the nice person that I once thought that they were. People, in a way, have become intellectually lazy, a lot of people, that it's easier just to keep on believing a view and dismiss stuff, even though that evidence is quite compelling.
And I think we're in like a death rattle right now of celebrities and Hollywood, because the mystery is gone for so many of them. Like we're seeing so much about them. We know their political views now. We know what they think about many things. And in a lot of ways, it kind of ruins it. In a lot of ways, they were much better off with more mystery. But this is one of the things social media has done. Like the mask is off of everybody. And people relate more to people on social media now, like people who are just influencers, for lack of a better word.
Well, there's two problems. That the greater level of access has removed some of the mystery that would surround genuine stars, people who were brilliant actors and write great songs and can sing, and they're authors and all this type of stuff. And what it's done is it's created individuals who really don't have much talent, the old famous for being famous. So, oh, look at me, I've had 1,000 men go through me. Now I'm all over the internet. That's not a talent. That's just having an orifice. And so there are too many of those individuals who, as a consequence of, and many of them, of course, are narcissists, but many individuals who, many narcissists that got ahead actually had some talent with them as well, because you actually did have to have that. Because the other narcissists would go, well, I can't promote you unless you've got songs that you can sing, and you've got songs that you can write, or you've got a brilliant book that you've written, and you're a decent actor. I need a decent product to work with. Now it's a case of, right, there are so many platforms, and we've got these connections. We can drum up some interest in you, do something scandalous. Let's do some rage baiting, because that didn't used to happen. You would get you might get some provocative headlines from time to time, but there are individuals that just make a career out of rage baiting, and so that gets the engagement, which means their stuff gets seen more than anybody else, and they make a living off the various payments from Facebook and from YouTube. And then you ask yourself, other than the talent for annoying people through rage baiting, which isn't really a talent, So I was explaining that one of the difficulties that has arisen is for celebrity, you've got individuals who've become overexposed, so the mystery is being lost, and then you've got the overpromotion of untalented individuals, which dilutes those which actually have genuine ability. So what do you have? A fatigue, as you say, the death rattle. I don't think that naturally they're going to disappear, because there's still plenty of people, the mouth breathers, that will be entertained by much of the shenanigans of these individuals, because it's easy to access it. Just sit back and let your mouth fall open and just digest it without actually thinking about it. But where it has become more problematic is they get spread much thinner because there's so many of them. And so it's so much easier to gain some celebrity status through doing things which are actually pretty mediocre.
And I think they're just more normalized now, because now that anyone, if they produce something of value or at least just get attention, they can get the same kind of numbers as traditional terrestrial TV, sometimes more in a lot of cases. So it's really kind of leveled the playing field, social media.
I think that was the case some years ago. I think it swung away from that to an extent, because there are so many people now who've decided, hey, I'm going to be a YouTuber. But when you look at it, for instance, the average amount of money that is made by YouTubers is $13,000 a year. You can't live on that,
No.
which demonstrates there are, and we can point to ones who are very successful. Okay, you can point to them very readily, but it means there are millions of people that have YouTube channels that just aren't watched, and they get nowhere. And so as a consequence of that, I mean, for instance, my channel's in the top 2%, and I haven't got 1 million subscribers, and I do rather well out of it, and I'm well known in the narcissism circles, and I'm well known in the what's called the Megxit community. But I'm not in the level of pop stars and so on and so forth. So it just shows that I'm in the top 2%, that there are so many people that are doing absolutely nothing, because there's so many people who've thought, hey, that's a good idea for a career, I'll go and do it. And you might have really good content, but the problem is, because you're holding up a match to the sun, you're trying to get noticed when there are millions upon millions upon millions of other people all doing the same things. So either you pay to play, so you spend a shitload on advertising, so then people get to notice you, or you're already established, like you're an established pop star, so you're known before you go on the channel. Take, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo. He racked up millions of subscribers in the drop of a hat. Why? Because he was already a world-famous footballer before he came onto the platform. Or if you were an early adopter, well, that ship has sailed a long time ago. And now you have to either get a bit of a break through what is, it might be that you do something that's picked up by mainstream media, so it gives it a bit of a boost. But for many people, they think, oh yeah, I'll have a career on YouTube or do Facebook and so forth. And it's a very crowded marketplace, and standing out, you'll see the ones that stand out. What you don't see are the hundreds upon thousands of individuals who don't get anywhere, because if the YouTube algorithm doesn't promote you, you're dead. You can have as brilliant as material as you like and the sexiest thumbnails known to humankind, but if that algorithm doesn't decide to promote you, you're dead. You won't get anywhere, because most of the traffic's driven by you being recommended by YouTube.
And yeah, I mean, and this to me is going to be the future of what AI is going to look like. Us creators, we already see it, how much an algorithm can influence our lives, but it's what it's going to look like to me when artificial intelligence takes over more and more things. I think an algo is basically a form of artificial intelligence. And
yeah,
I think, and what do you think about this though? Do you think it's more the algorithm, or do you think it's people's attention that is promoting the algorithm to do certain things?
It's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario, isn't it? That it's in their interest to get you to try and stay for as long as possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you stay for as long as possible on one provider. It's like it's similar to Amazon with their strategy for selling books and ebooks. They do not care if H.G. Tudor sells 1 million books or 1 million people all sell one book each. Amazon gets the same amount of money. So similarly, as long as you are watching something, they don't care what it is. So there's always this sidebar that's trying to tempt you to go onto something else. And so that's the difficulty that creators have, is that there's always the possibility that somebody's watching a video and they're, oh, that looks interesting, and off they go, and then you've lost them. And naturally, there are individuals who are loyal to creators. I have a very loyal fan base. Some people, it's less so. They're fickle, and particularly amongst younger people, where they'll be jumping around. It shows, for instance, with TikTok. My audience tends to be older, 30 plus. And generally, that means that they have the ability to watch things for a little bit longer than others. And so I generally look to create videos somewhere in the 8-minute to 12-minute mark, because that gives you sufficient time to explain things. It also means that it's not just a snack. People feel like they've had a meal. Because I know, like, some of my subscribers say, oh, I'd really like if you did an hour's worth of material. I think, yeah, well, you would, fair enough. But generally speaking, that's too long for people. You go to places like TikTok, it's successful because people just watch something for 10 seconds. You know, you get people whereby they can't stand introductions any longer. Someone having an intro, it gets in the way, because their attention span has been whittled down to, they can only watch something for 10 or 15 seconds. Anything longer than that, bored, onto the next thing. And because they can do that, they can swipe onto the next thing, because the algorithm, the platform, allows them to do that. And then the algorithm starts to, basically, it's always saying, what about the next thing? What about the next thing? So you get that dopamine hit.
Yeah, and you aren't lying about that. I mean, I've made 60-second videos, and some of the comments will be, get to the point already. And I'm like,
exactly.
I got to the point within 15 seconds. Oh my God. But that's just goes to show you how short people's attention span is. And the other thing you had me thinking, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the movie V for Vendetta, but he mentions in one of his speeches that if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into the mirror. And I think, well, when it comes to the kinds of creators that get popular, like, our attention is valuable. Our attention is absolutely contributing to the kinds of people that get popular. And I think people get annoyed at the Haktua girl getting popular, for example. But it's like, well, people don't understand. Even your hate attention is feeding it. Like,
exactly.
The algorithm doesn't care if it's positive attention or negative attention. It's like a narcissist in that way, right?
Absolutely right. If you want to stop these individuals gaining fame and prominence, you've got to unplug from them. It's in the same way as making life very difficult for a narcissist is to go no contact. If you keep engaging with a narcissist, you're giving the narcissist what they want. Even if you're arguing with the narcissist, you're still giving the narcissist fuel. If you're telling the narcissist that he's a grade A arsehole, you're still giving him fuel. He won't like it, because it's challenge fuel, but you're still giving fuel. And the same with certain providers. You'll see it. That, and Meghan Markle's a prime example of that, probably one of the most divisive people on the planet. There's all of these people who are basically saying, why doesn't she go away? Well, she doesn't go away because mainstream media knows that people will click and watch and read and comment. So they're in it they don't care about her. All they care about is advertising revenue. And as soon as that starts to drop, they'll find somebody else to talk about. But the point is, many of the individuals that watch will say, yeah, you all stop looking at her. You all stop looking at her, but I'm not going to. I want you all to stop, but I'm allowed to keep going. And of course, if everybody thinks that way, well, I'll keep going because everybody else will stop. Then nobody will stop. And so they're invested in wanting to see the eventual car crash. With some people, they will finally just become bored because they'll think, oh, this massive exposure of her, it's never going to happen. It is, as HG has said, it's just a death by 1,000 cuts. It's taking too long. And they might one day just think, I've got better things to do. Or, for instance, you go on holiday for 2 weeks, so you don't look at anything because you're enjoying yourself on the beach and you're doing other things. So you break the habit of looking at her. So you drift off and do something else. That could happen. But for many people, the reason that these irritating and annoying individuals exist is because they are being fed. They continue to do it where they're narcissists because they need to be fed. And then the media recognizes, well, you're all, for instance, with that Bonnie Blue, so many people were expressing disgust. Oh, gosh, I bet her parents are proud of her. And, oh, imagine going with that if you're the 1,000th man and all the rest of it. You're still commenting about her. You've still, in your indignation, read the article, which has given them advertising revenue. What you need to do is stop and unplug from it. But people ultimately won't, not in sufficient numbers. But if people did, then the providers of this information would realize there's no point celebrating or promoting these people because there's no market for them. And as you say, if you essentially, it is the people that are watching who are guilty because they are the ones that are feeding it.
I think that's very important for people to recognize. We do have the power with that. Our attention is valuable, and we shouldn't just, even our hate attention, even if you want to just rip into somebody, that's going to keep it going. And I think there's a fine line between calling out injustices and things that really do need to be called out, and then mindless hating that just goes nowhere.
Yeah. And also directing it towards something which is substantial, is a proper injustice. Getting yourself bent out of shape about a promiscuous woman, just ignore her. That's the easiest thing to do. The plight of children not being fed, that's something that you ought to get behind because that's an injustice that affects the world. So one could understand that people would want to engage and highlight the injustice of that, but getting all worked up. But of course, it comes back to, it's interesting because I remember seeing something where I think it was some football fans and somebody had written, look how, if only you cared so much about what's happening to your country as you care about with regard to what this footballer did at the weekend. And it's almost this misplaced energy that occurs, that the things that really matter, people don't actually en masse do anything about it because it's too hard. And that's when people like my kind can take advantage of it, because it means you're easy to control. It's the bread and circuses argument. People find it too difficult to probe things, find it too difficult to think outside of the box. They just want it. They want to be fed. Feed them a hate figure. It's like 1984 when they would all get together and rant and rave at the perceived enemy. Orwell was so right about all of the obsession with people staring into their screens and so forth. Give the people what they want. Create the enemies that they can all boo and hiss at and write their 100 words below the line about. But if you stop doing it, the powers that be would stop feeding you that stuff, and you might then actually have time to address things that matter. But it plays into the ability of my kind, because it's all about the control, to use that as a means of controlling populaces.
Yeah. Starving it of the attention is absolutely the way.
Yeah, that's
have
the
you
key.
heard? Yeah. And have you heard of Hanlon's razor? I'm curious your thoughts on this, but it's never attribute to malice what could be attributed to stupidity. Have you heard that?
Yes, I think that's entirely apt. Very much the case. I do. And it is the case because there are actually far more stupid people on this planet than there are actually malicious individuals. And so many of the things that go wrong are just born out of sheer stupidity. There'll be some people who say unkindly that many of those people reside in Florida because of the concept of Florida man and Florida woman, isn't there? Which I think is very unfair, because I think Florida is a lovely state and I like going there. But there are all around the world a lot of stupid people that cause problems. And it's their stupidity. It's not malice, which again makes them rather malleable for the likes of manipulators to use their stupidity against them and as against other people, because they don't question things. This isn't to say that you spend every single day going, is that right? Does that make sense? You don't have to be, there isn't a conspiracy behind everything. Indeed, there are too many people that spend far too long doing that and see things which aren't there. But the actual just thinking things through. The simplest thing, for example, is take your news from a variety of different sources. So then you can get a mixture of views. That's not difficult to do. You've got this thing called the internet. So find some right-wing publications, find some left-wing publications, find some centrist ones. You don't need to read the whole thing. You can get bite-sized chunks from each, and then you can go, right, I've seen several different arguments. I'm now informed myself. I think it's this, rather than just going to the one that's easy. Challenge yourself a little bit. But that's, of
Sure.
course, most people don't, which, as I say, makes it easier for my kind to do what we do.
Sure. And the problem with stupid people, it's like in the movie The Sixth Sense, they don't realize they're stupid. Similar to the lesser and some of the mid-range narcissists, they don't know. They don't know that they're that either. The greater ones may, and
Yeah.
do.
It's an interesting argument as to which is the more dangerous, an individual that knows what they are and behaves that way, or one that doesn't have a clue. In some respects, you might argue that it's the one that doesn't have a clue, because they just blunder along, ensconced in their own ignorance, thinking they're doing the right thing whilst mayhem ensues.
And they effectively act as flying monkeys for all of the people that are trying to pull the strings. And, we see that when Blake Lively calls her dragons, "Oh, I got my dragons, Taylor Swift here." And that's another one, people that you've mentioned before, is Taylor Swift and her narcissistic tendencies there. A lot of people wouldn't think that with her, but it's interesting that, and I agree with you, she does have it when you look into it. And that's something
Absolutely.
that you do a great job at, that going into the backgrounds of a lot of these celebrity figures and pulling it apart and examining it.
Many people misunderstand that. They think that when I do that, I'm saying this person's a bad person. I'm not. Because, for instance, there are things that I've done that some people would put in the category of bad, possibly even evil. But then also I provide thousands of videos gratis, which saves people's lives. So you'd put that under good. So narcissists will create fantastic music which entertains you. They will play sport that brings you joy and delight as they propel your team to win the championship. They will create devices which make your life easier. So narcissists all around will do things which benefit, whilst, of course, there'll always be casualties because they're narcissists. Just because of labeling somebody, it isn't the case of me saying they're good or bad. It's simply this is what they are. You can decide whether you think they're a good thing or a bad thing. That's your judgment. I'm just telling you what they are. And invariably with somebody like Taylor Swift, very successful songwriter and performer, got millions of fans around the globe, and you could still recognize what she is, and that doesn't prohibit you from enjoying her music. You can still recognize what she is, and you can still go and enjoy the concerts. Just understand what she is. You don't have to have a hissy fit and immediately go, "Oh, well, you've called her a narcissist. That's not fair." And no, it's right. I'm not saying I'm not saying that she's a bad thing, because to some she'll be a good thing, to others she'll be a bad thing. It depends on the interaction that you're having. But it's important for people to understand these things, because it helps them understand what's going on in their own personal lives, with famous examples which they can draw parallels with. Again, with Meghan Markle, so many people have contacted me and said, "I didn't know I was dealing with a narcissist until I watched your series about this one's wife. The light bulbs came on." That's part of one of the major reasons why I do it, because I'm using her as a tool to reach millions of people. So these analyses are done to cause people to understand, to inform, and for them to understand that our kind is prevalent all around and is pulling the strings. And that's why the world is the way that it is.
Right. And the most fascinating part to me is the political blind spots people have, where people even understand narcissism, and we'll use both sides to not ruffle too many feathers, but so like Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, it's like everything they do is only by coincidence for their love of the country or something. It's like their narcissism is really what's driving their behavior, in my opinion. And it's a coincidence that if it helps anyone else.
Politics is one of the major hunting grounds for the narcissist, because political power allows the assertion of control on a massive scale, national and international. It allows the reaping of huge amounts of fuel. It allows exposure to lots of different individuals for character trait acquisition, and it comes with a host of residual benefits like making shitloads of money, contacts, access to networks, facade management, and so forth. It is one of the most attractive arenas. And because it attracts so many narcissists, it also means that in order to survive there, you generally have to be one. There are plenty of non-narcissists also, but they don't necessarily get to the top. And so It's just different kinds of narcissists that invariably occupy the position of president or prime minister or chief poobah, whatever the title may be. And many people, because of their political persuasions, if they don't like the incumbent, oh, yeah, he's definitely a narcissist. And when it's their guy that's saying, oh, no, he's really kind, he's not. He's a narcissist as well. But again, it's not a case of good thing, bad thing. That's what they are. If the way that they behave meets with your expectations and your political outlook, you will see them as an effective and good narcissist, and you are allowed to have that view. If they don't accord with your view, they are a bad narcissist. But the fact is, it should really be regarded in that situation as a neutral position. They are a narcissist in the same way as they've got blonde hair or they've got two legs. That's just what they are. How that pans out in relation to you depends upon your outlook and your level of involvement. You get involved with a narcissist personally, you sleep with one, they're in your family, you're likely to have a bad outcome. But if the only involvement with the narcissist is that you download their music and go and watch them in concert and you never meet them, you're not going to have a downside from that because you're at arm's length. So it's not as straightforward as just going, oh, narcissist, horrible. There's more to it than that.
Right. And I think it's important for people to understand just because they're a narcissist doesn't mean they can't do good things. They can still do good things, but that doesn't negate the fact that they're still absolutely a narcissist. And it's the blind spots that are completely wild to me that people have right now, that even people who understand this stuff, no, he just loves the country, or no, that's not, that virtue signaling isn't this. It's like, you really can't see it. Like the motivated reasoning is that blinding, but they can't.
Yeah, they can't. And you can try and explain it to people, but ultimately, if they won't grasp it, then they won't grasp it. So you don't waste your breath. You just give thanks to your own personal God that you understand.
True enough, sir. And I think that's my one concern for the future as things move forward.
Absolutely.
Well, HG, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me on. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Me as well. You have a great rest of your day, sir.
You too. Thank you.